Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. This is Friday, and this is the day we do our Mythbusters, and the co-host is Chris Rosini. Chris, welcome to the program today.
Great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Well, good. What do we have on the agenda? I understand we're going to talk a little bit about free trade.
Yes, we are. There was big news this week with Donald Trump, who was said to save 1,000 jobs from going to Mexico with his deal with Carrier. It made great headlines for him, great optics. But on this show, we're going to, things aren't always what they seem, so we're going to go into that. And we'll start with the body of ideas that we espouse. And if you could please start with free market, talking about the free market and the moral principles that attract you to the ideas.
Of course, there's a lot of principles why I believe in the free market. The discussion's been around for a long time, and we've been told even by the early members of our founding system here today, is the fact that the more you trade with people, the less likely you are to fight with them. And that's a pretty important principle. And also, free trade enhances the benefit of all those people who participate. Not only is there less fighting, the productivity is better, there's a sharing of information, and generally speaking, free markets enhances the prosperity of both sides of the coin. But I look at it, I start off with a fundamental principle, and the fundamental principle is that people ought to have a right to spend the money any way they want. If one believes in individual sovereignty, you have a right to your life, your liberty, and you have a responsibility. You should go out and take care of yourself, and you have anything left over after you take care of yourself. You have capital, or you can spend that money any way you want. So if it's your money and you get to spend it any way you want, that means nobody should prohibit you from buying things from overseas. Possibly the only exception to this would be if there's a declared war going on, that there could be restraints on that as part of a war effort. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about economic conditions that come about where neither side's happy and they blame each other, and there's currency wars going on and overtaxation, all these things. So they resort to blaming the opposition and never looking to the problems that one has themselves, and therefore they're saying that what we have to have is regulations. But the moral principle is it's your money. You ought to be able to spend it the way you want. And the other basic principle is harder for people to understand because it's been ingrained in us that the government is there to protect certain special interests. They're there to make sure that the corporations survive and bail them out if necessary, subsidize them through benefits and an easy monetary system. So they believe that the system is designed, to help the wealthy people. But the system really is designed, to help the consumer. The consumer is king. So therefore, you can't say, well, maybe we shouldn't subsidize big business, and a certain group in the population would agree with that, but you have to protect labor. Otherwise, if we had no labor laws in this country, no forced unions on us, and no minimum wage, everybody would be working for $2 an hour, and everybody would be living in poverty, and they'd go through all this. And yet, the free market in labor and all these things are designed for one thing: the moral principle that you buy and sell what you want to anybody you want. At the same time, the consumer is king. Yes, you might look and say, well, the businessman needs help. He needs subsidized help and subsidized loans, easy credit. Or labor's not getting enough money. Well, maybe the reason is there's not enough productivity and no overtaxes and whatnot. But the whole purpose is to satisfy the consumer and no special benefits to anybody. The government's role is to protect liberty and property ownership and voluntary contracts. With that, we wouldn't be in these trade wars and these fighting about tariffs and all the mischief going on manipulation of tax codes to satisfy one group versus another. So if we would narrow down on that and follow those two basic principles, believe me, we would be a lot better off.
Yes, we believe that in and in a free society, there should be and there would be no protective tariffs. Now, we always hear one common argument that I would like for you to address today, and it goes like this. We would hear, if the U.S. abolished all tariffs, that wouldn't stop other countries from unfairly erecting tariffs on their own. So in other words, we're supposed to shoot ourselves in the foot just because other countries do. So can you put this argument to rest, Dr. Paul?
Yes, and that is one of the tougher ones to explain and get people to understand it. Milton Friedman was very good on this. He said, if there are no tariffs and anything's going on and we don't subsidize our businesses to get more business overseas, if somebody else subsidizes their business, let's say they want to sell us a $5,000 automobile for $4,000 to undercut us, that's a $1,000 benefit to each person that buys that car, and they have that money to spend on something else, so they become wealthier. So if other countries want to subsidize and help their corporation, it becomes a benefit. The big problem here is when you're shifting from a bad situation to a good situation, there's a lag period because the jobs have to be adjusted, and people say, oh, no, you can't do that. That will cause temporary unemployment. But tariffs don't work in protection. Tariffs should be seen, as a tax. So if you're going to try to protect the people and protect the consumer to get the best deal, if you put on tariffs, you put on taxes. So taxes, conservatives and libertarians and free market people who profess to believe in free markets, they should never be, for protectionism and tariffs. Some people say, well, it should be more sophisticated than that. What we do is just manipulate our currency. And, of course, we've been pretty good at that because we've been blessed, so to speak, with the reserve currency of the world. So that gives us a tremendous advantage and also lulls us into this temptation that we are the kingpins and we can get away with it. But yes, they will try to do it. If we had no tariffs on anybody else, actually the Constitution permits tariffs. The real evil comes in the mischief of protective tariffs. Protect one industry and not another industry. Protect the car industry or the steel industry. That's real economic mischief. I think the founders had in mind that, well, if you had a 1 or 2% import tariff, you could finance the whole government. And that might possibly be true, and there would be no income tax. But basically, it's the competitiveness where you're trying to get an advantage or punish somebody that it leads to trouble. Neither side wins when there's a competitive trade war goes on. And a lot of people, including myself, there's a lot of anger associated with this, and the two countries can become very hostile. Just think of the greater hostility now that we have with shouting back and forth with China at the present time. And that is sort of opening up the door to militarism, and it's happened too often over the past. So even though some people will argue there's an apparent benefit from tariff, if there's the slightest bit of benefit, it's short-lived. And it is much better to really understand the principles of free trade because that's part of a free society, it's part of individual liberty, and it's part of getting the government out of the business because that's not the role of government. The role of government should be to protect our liberties. That is, free to choose what product we want and at what price, and not have so much of this protectiveness from the government. Inevitably, when government comes for the purpose of making everybody equal and to protect everybody and take care of everybody, believe me, the net result is always making the situation much worse.
Okay, now let's get to the carrier deal itself. If you could please describe for our viewers what the deal is, and please give your thoughts on whether or not it's an overall good or bad thing.
Well, what we're doing now is going through the process of will the president-elect follow through on his promises, and what has he done so far? He's not even president yet, and yet there's claims now that he has done a wonderful thing because he's been able to get Carrier to automatically, say, nope, we're going to keep the jobs in Indiana. Well, it's not quite. That's the headline. but not quite that way. His promise was to keep the 2,100 people in the Indiana plant, and there's going to be 1,100 theoretically right at the moment that won't go to Mexico. But there'll be 700 from another plant that will go to Mexico, part of United Technology. So it's sort of a little bit of deception there. And the plant will not be closed. So he argues, Trump argues that this was, a victory. And there were some things, some of the negotiations, some of the deal making were worth thinking about, because the state came up and was going to give a $7 million benefit to Carrier over 10 years. Well, in this day and age, that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but at least they're moving the principle in the right direction. So anything that reduced regulations and reduced taxes, I think, is very, very good. But this idea of reducing taxes for one company versus another, that gets a little bit more difficult, especially if you are threatened with losing jobs to Mexico. It's more tempted to give the tax benefit to the company that's making the most noise. Now, my policy over the years has always been to support anything that looks like a tax abatement or a tax credit, even though I didn't like the condition, well, you're giving it to one, why not the other? If it's going to help this corporation, why don't you give it to everybody else? But I never wanted to vote to raise the taxes. If you don't vote for the tax credit or abatement, then you're supporting an increase in taxes. But that is part of what this deal was back. There was a promise that the taxes would be helped. Of course, it hasn't helped. But the other thing that happened in this negotiation and what happened in this agreement that has been broadcast here in the last couple of days is the fact that our government and our president-elect has a lot of leverage. It isn't so much that they're going to give them, somebody's going to give them $1 million here or $1 million there, and later on we're going to do this or that. Guess what? Carrier's part of United Technology Corporation, and they're partners with the government. They're part of the military-industrial complex. They're part of the deep state, and they're making a deal with them and saying, well, what we're going to do is we're going to tinker here, because actually United Technologies, under the gun in a way, because if Trump is true to his word, he can take away some of those contracts. And it's huge. They have $23 billion of contracts, with the government. And this is an ancient history. This is ongoing. On December 1st of this year, they had a contract with United Technology, the owner of Carrier, for $309 million for a part to go in the F-35, which is a boondoggle. So, yes, there's a lot of leverage. You do it our way or you lose your contract. That's not free markets. It's sort of like the way that our federal government plays with our states. We believe in states' rights. We'll just give them this money for education or highways, and then we'll give you the rules. If you don't like the rules, you want to get rid of the rules, but you want the money, it doesn't work. The federal government says, if you don't take orders from us, then you're going to lose the money. So there's a little bit of that going on, with this. So, yes, there's a great need for changing policies to keep jobs here. But it's a little bit too early. I mean, even to claim this as a major victory, it's a little bit early. But to claim that we're not going to see a change in policy isn't right either, because we do hope that tax codes get changed and less regulations, and we have more competitiveness and we can compete. But boy, I'll tell you what, the problems are overwhelming. When you think of the protection big corporations get, because they get tremendous subsidies, are you going to get rid of these a military budget? I mean, the new administration is planning on massively increasing the military budget. So that's not going to happen, because those funds are always distributed for political reasons. So it's not going to go away very easy. How are you going to get rid of artificially high wages? Does the market dictate wages here? No. The real tragedy is the average laborers, the wages right now are going down in real terms. And yet if you're making $7 or $8 an hour, you can't live on it. So they have to use coercion and get the government behind demanding that it go to 15. Well, if the market were allowed to operate, it might be 15. We don't know that. But to demand that it go to 15 is tremendous increase in labor costs. Same way, if a union has leverage and they say, if you don't give us our wage, we're going to close you down. This is more power and interference in the market wages that should be, much more adjusted by the market alone. One of the worst things that they did in the Depression was artificially keep wages higher than they should have been, and they didn't allow the correction. So that is going on, right now. So if you don't correct, if you don't resort to free market wages and you don't resort to getting rid of all subsidies to big corporations, if you don't get rid of the Federal Reserve to have this artificially low interest rate and the bailouts for the, too rich to fail business, I'll tell you what, it's overwhelming. That's why I get to the point where we're saying, no matter how well-intentioned and no matter how much you tinker on the edges, you can't solve these problems. You're still going to have, the problems that we're seeing, with carrier. So this is an issue that's going to be with us. The other thing is, if this works, let's say the plant stays open and there's 2,100 jobs saved, well, and the government's involved in just about everything in the military-industrial complex and other industries, the educational industry, all these people are involved. That means, all we have to do is complain a little and say, well, we're going to send our business overseas. And then, of course, the solution is, well, let's give them more help. Well, if it's low taxes, give it to everybody right now. And that, fortunately, is on the president-to-be's plate. He wants to get capital gains taxes down to 15. Now, that is what we ought to be talking about, and the market forces. But the type of solution that we have here with Carrier, I just have a hard time believing this has a whole lot to do with free markets and solving the problems that we have. And of course, when you take this position and say, "Oh, you don't even care about these jobs. You don't care about keeping these jobs in this country." No, I care. What I really care about is making sure that we're competitive and that we have we have a high demand for labor, that we're actually looking for people to come in and work for us, because that's what would happen if you had minimal or no regulations on what the business people have to put up with. You didn't have any inflation, artificially low interest rates, and all these things, excessive taxes. Believe me, the world would be completely different. Unfortunately, for some people, I believe that what we're doing with Carrier is just tokenism. It has very little, if anything, to do with solving our problem. Our problems are much different. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try and listen to them, because the few items in it that I agree with, lower regulations, less taxes, fine and dandy. But this whole thing of threat and innuendos and saying, well, we'll take this contract away from you. Yeah, I'd like to take a lot of contracts away from them. I don't want to double the military budget and the military-industrial complex. I want to have defense. I want to spend money on defense and not play these games of building airplanes like the F-35 and aircraft carriers and all these things that don't even work. A lot of the weapon systems, when you get halfway through, they cancel them because they're cost overrun and they're not workable.
Yes, when it comes to solving the big problems, this may be a token thing, but you like to present a question to Americans that what is the role of government? What should it be? When we look at this Carrier situation, is the role of the president to go out and strike sweetheart deals with certain companies? And doesn't that just give an incentive to other companies to at least threaten to go to Mexico so that maybe they could get a sweetheart deal? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I guess the first question we should ask is, our presidents have been involved a long time. Even back in the early 60s, I remember when the steel mills were raising the price of steel too much, and President Kennedy at that time was really incensed about that, so he did some jawboning. So I guess they've been jawboning for a long time, and which means the executive branch of government is too powerful. No, the government shouldn't be there. They're not a regulator of the economy. They're not central economic planners. They're not supposed to be involved in 80% of what they do, or even more. So people say, well, what do you do? What do you do? It's so big. Well, it's difficult because everybody's dependent. Everybody's addicted. So it is going to be very hard. But if we get to the stage, once it's recognized, this system doesn't work anymore, and that's going to happen, then you say, well, how do we do? Do we have to start over from scratch? Well, maybe starting over with scratch, if we had everybody believing in freedom and individual liberty, that'd be all right. But even right now, we could start working in that direction if we say that if we want reform, why don't we just look at the Constitution? Article 1, Section 8. Look and see how much authority does the president have to do this. Matter of fact, the president doesn't even have authority by the Constitution to deal with these international trade agreements. The WTO, they're all bad agreements, and I certainly agree with Trump on that, and he wants to renegotiate them. But the truth is they should be banned. They should be canceled out, but it should be the Congress. Congress has a responsibility about foreign trade. International trade, that's the responsibility of Congress. So if there are tariff debates going on, it should be the Congress. The Congress doesn't have the authority to renege on that and just give it to the president and say, whatever you do, Mr. President, you'll do it. You can send it back to us and we'll rubber stamp it. And we accept the notion that we can't even alter it and amend it. So the Congress goes along with it. The pressure groups love it. They don't really have to twist the arms of everybody in Congress. They just have to be on the inside track of the president and executive branch. And, if you're worried about Wall Street, I don't know whether you should be reassured right now about Wall Street being excluded by what's happening, or the banking system being excluded, or Goldman Sachs being excluded. You'd have to think that over again. No, the president has a responsibility in defending this country, but it's very, very narrow and very, very precise. He's the commander-in-chief. He's in charge of the military. He's to fight the wars. And he can't do it unless the Congress gives him the authority to fight the wars. But no, we don't even do that anymore. So the president, whether it's trade or international affairs or fighting wars or regulations, more regulations. This current president is probably one of the worst, thousands and thousands of pages of regulations, and let's hope at least that we'll see some changes on that. But a lot of people have promised about presidents have promised about dealing with over-regulation, but I'd like somebody to show me a year where we actually had less regulations rather than more. But unfortunately, our presidents are way too powerful, and the Congress reneges on their responsibility. And, of course, the Supreme Court, if they've been taught by the same professors that our president and our Congress people have been trained to teach, they come up with these weird explanations that the reason why we can't rule the Obamacare unconstitutional is, well, what we can do if there's a penalty, we're not allowed a penalty under the Constitution, but we can tax. So we won't call it a penalty. We'll call it a tax if people don't follow the mandate. See, that's how crazy the whole system is, and that is the reason why I'm convinced we are going to keep marching on in the direction that we're going. And I sure hope I'm wrong on this, and all these miracles are going to happen, and we're going to have balance of trade, and we're going to have the gold standard. But there is no effort in worrying about and cutting back on, to me, one of the worst things. The living beyond our means as a nation and running up our debt and monetizing the debt, and that there's not even a pretense of that. We're going to spend so much more money, and we now are bringing into effect, and we are starting to see that the effects of inflation. You say, what do you mean? We don't have much inflation. Yeah, we have a ton of inflation because that's all that money supply that was increased with the QEs that had gone on for a decade, nearly a decade. So the consequence of that inflation will be what we already have, all the distortions in the economy, but now we're going to see the prices as a reflection of the inflated monetary system. So we need to be prepared, and all I want to do is urge people to be cautious, to know exactly what they're endorsing, be careful, and limit the scope of government and understanding the proper role of government. The proper role of government is to defend liberty, and that is it. And it's no more complicated than that, because that liberty has been granted to us by our Creator, and it has come to us in a natural way. There are natural rights. They didn't come from government. So in a very limited fashion, the government's responsibility would be at least to protect our liberties. And most people think, well, everybody's going to fall through the crack, and nobody's going to have health care or the benefit. The truth is, if you want to look at history, the freer society, the more productive they are, and the more prosperous they are, and the greater the middle class. So that is the reason, if you look at what we have today, is that it's time that we changed our tune and truly went back to constitutional government and limiting the power of the president and getting a Congress to participate in the protection of our liberties. Chris, I want to thank you for being with us today, very much for bringing us this issue about carrier and trade throughout the world.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
And I want to thank our viewers for tuning in today, and I'd like to invite you to come back to the Ron Paul Liberty Report real soon. Thank you.